666, the sign of the devil. Over here, a bloody skull and crossbones.
In Maine, a dozen churches were defaced with satanic symbols. In California, New Jersey, Alabama, and elsewhere, police have found inverted crosses and the remains of mutilated animals. But by far the most frightening of all are the reports of teenagers killing other kids in Satan's name. Item, Douglas County, Georgia.
I'm sorry for you, young lady, and I sentence you to a term of life in prison. I'm sorry for you, and I wish you good luck. Remove her from the courtroom, Mr. Sheriff.
17-year-old Melissa Ernest and two other teenage members of her coven admitted drinking her 15-year-old victim's blood, then dancing around her still warm body. Now listen to this report from a small town in Maine.
Yesterday's conviction of Scott Waterhouse for the murder of 12-year-old Giselle Cody may finally bring an end to talk of a satanic cult in the town.
Item, Long Island, New York. Police arrest 17-year-old Ricky Casso for the ritual murder of 15-year-old Gary Lowers. Casso gouged out his victim's eyes.
As we've seen, the level of violence in these crimes committed in Satan's name is often appalling and savage, brutal enough to shock even hardened police officers. Detective Paul Hart thought he had seen everything. Then this veteran New Jersey officer saw how a suburban teenager murdered and mutilated his own mother.
I believe that evil will once again rise and conquer the love of God. If this pact is to your approval, sign below.
Just barely 14 years old, Tommy Sullivan had written this contract with the devil before he butchered his mother with his Boy Scout knife. The murder took place in the basement of the Sullivan family home.
As we came down here, we found Mrs. Sullivan laying on the floor just about in this area here.
Describe the condition of the body.
It appeared that her throat had been cut and a good portion of her face had literally been slashed away. Tommy died as brutally as his mother did, but at his own hands.
What did Tommy then manage to do to himself? What wounds did he inflict on himself to kill himself?
His first self-inflicted wounds were a series of wounds to his wrists. 3, if I remember correctly, deep enough to actually sever the arteries and the tendons in his arm, enough to snap back his wrist. And after doing that, he literally slit his throat from ear to ear with this 3.5-inch knife from the windpipe all the way back to the spinal column, and to the point of almost taking his head off.
Understandably unable to live with the gruesome memories in their family, Tommy's father and younger brother have moved out of state.
Do you think you can ever find it in your heart to forgive your son?
I don't know. I loved him dearly. But he also took my wife, who I loved.
How could this happen here? To a nice boy from a good Catholic school and a fine middle-class family. Sure, he was obsessed by the symbols. This is what his room looked like on the night of the murder and suicide. But heavy metal is not answer enough.
You're a veteran of Vietnam. Had you ever seen anything that brutal?
Certainly in an area like this, in a town like this, in a neighborhood like this, you don't expect to see that type of violence. And it was brutal. It was brutal, and there's few of us that will forget that.
Nor do you forget these drawings Tommy made just before he killed himself. But you continue to search for the reasons. What made Tommy? What made the others do it?
As reporters investigating this story for months, we have a good idea of what's going on in this country. Our big question tonight is why. This is Detective Sergeant Paul Hart. Yes, stand up, Paul. He's the man, the cop who investigated the Tommy Sullivan tragedy. I've never heard of wounds that ferocious, and the pictures are even more appalling. Pictures that we did not show here. Do you think, you're not a theologian, you're a cop, do you think that Tommy was possessed?
I think that possession is a state of mind, and it would have been a hell of an interview with Tommy had we located him. Certainly, like I had said before, his death was as violent as his mother's.
Father Labar, you investigate these cases for the Catholic Church. Is it the Church's position that demonic possession is possible?
It certainly is.
There have been many cases down through the centuries, many in our own decade, for example, of where the devil has actually possessed people and caused them to do many strange things.
So you believe it's possible?
I believe not only is it possible, it is a reality in some very select amount of cases.
Let's go to London for a quick exchange with Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy, I'm glad you're on the program. I'll interview you in greater detail in a couple of minutes. The one thing I have to ask you now, though, is, of course, the vast majority of your fans and the fans of heavy metal music are not Satanists. But there is no doubt, at least not in our reporting, that that heavy metal music plays a role. Every single kid whose case we know about, who committed a violent act in Satan's name, was also into heavy metal music. What's your response to that, Oz?
Well, I don't really know. All I do is make music. You know, I don't sit down and purposely plan to freak everybody out. I mean, I always have played heavy metal music. I suppose when I was younger and I started writing songs, my world was kind of dark and dingy. You know, I came from a working class family who had nothing, no dough, no prospect of ever having much money, and so that's how I saw the world as a child. And so, I mean, not all my songs are about Satanism.
Of course.
In fact, if you
stand by, Ozzy, because I want to get to Sean Sellers, who's the youngest kid ever to go on death row in Oklahoma. Sean is a kid who murdered his mother, murdered his stepfather, murdered a convenience store clerk. What did Satanism have to do with it, Sean? What did Satan, do you feel, have to do with, first, your murder of that convenience store clerk?
Satanism was, well, the murder was because it was a, how do I say this so that you can understand it? It was a sacrifice to prove allegiance to Satan, to prove my hatred towards society and everything.
Well, hatred towards society is one thing, Sean, but how does Satan make you commit murder?
Yeah, but Geraldo, Sean, in that particular situation, Sean Sellers...
This is Tom Wedge, an expert in Satanism, who is with Sean in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Yeah,
right.
Go ahead, quickly.
Sean had broken every one of the 10 commandments except thou shalt not commit murder. And after he worshipped before the altar and asked for powers from Satan, he went out to do this. Technically, it was a human sacrifice.
Okay, I got to move on. You guys stand by. We'll get back to you. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get into the mind of another all-American boy who came under the influence of Satanism and took part in a crime without passion or motive. He and his pals beat another classmate to death. We'll be right back. As you may have heard, we faced a much publicized dilemma in putting this program together. Many of the things about Satanism are offensive, and putting on an offensive television show was not our aim, so the most gruesome scenes have been left out. Now, what we've kept is strong. We think it's strong enough to get across an effective warning. Satanism can be cause for concern. Its roots are anywhere. Its roots are even in the very heartland of this country. Take a look.
Carl Junction, Missouri. A town of about 4,000 souls in the heart of the Bible Belt, where people believe in God and the devil. Periodically, satanic graffiti and some mutilated animals turn up, causing alarmists to cry that satanic cults are operating in the area. Those charges were routinely discounted until a group of students from this high school shocked the entire nation. Late one night last December, 4 teenagers who had been dabbling in Satanism carried baseball bats, a cat, and a length of rope to an isolated spot near their small town here in Missouri. By the time the night was over, the cat had been mutilated and one of the boys beaten to death by the other 3, who then dumped his body in a well. One of the kids who did it, Pete Rowland, is now serving life sentence without parole here at this maximum security facility in Fulton, Missouri. The other 2 boys, his classmates, were also sentenced to life.
Have you ever been
Here in the first interview since the murder, Pete Rowland talks about the satanic elements of the crime.
What was it about Satanism that attracted you?
Power.
just, with power comes money.